All right, how you doing, everybody? My name is Dave Branscome. I am a Global Partner Solutions Architect focused on security with Microsoft. And why is my thing not working already? This is great. All right, let's try this. There we go. All right, see if this gets going now. Okay, so that's me, if you want a close-up. I've been at Microsoft for about 18 years, variety of roles. I started out in consulting services, moved over to what used to be called Premier, where I worked with some federal government agencies and worked on their environments. I do live in Raleigh, North Carolina, so I'm relatively close to everybody. And I have, I love security certifications. If you have any questions about security certifications, feel free to ask me. I've got 14 GX certs. I'm working on 2 more, the machine learning one and I can't remember the other one, red teaming or something like that. I have 36 active Microsoft certifications. I've passed 85, something like that of them. I just can't keep up with those things. Anyway, that's me. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is Volt Typhoon. Who's heard of Volt Typhoon? All right, or Salt Typhoon, right? So the story begins at 3 o'clock in the morning on a tiny island in the Pacific named Guam, okay? That's where it begins. There, a telecom engineer notices something unusual going on in his environment. He sees some admin logins that don't quite fit with the timing. 3 a.m. is an odd time for an admin to be logging in. So he contacts Microsoft, and that's where the story gets good. Now, who is Volt Typhoon? So, number one, they are a state-sponsored APT group. They've been active, we know for sure, since at least 2021. They were definitively identified by Microsoft in 2023 and given characterization of what their targets are. Typically their targets are in the area of infrastructure. So they're looking at things like telecom and shipping and power grids and things that support the movement of materials and things like that. So while their emphasis is on telecom, they do attack these other areas as well. One thing that is very unique about Volt Typhoon is they are very stealthy, they are very quiet, they have exceptional OPSEC. They don't want to be found, they're not interested in making a big splash with anybody, they just want to exist in the environment and do their thing. So they've been tracked by Microsoft as part of their Typhoon classification system. Now for the first prize that I'm going to give away, which is a lockpick set, I'm going to ask you, so we all know Volt Typhoon is which country? China. Now here's the question for you. What is Microsoft's designation for United States as a threat actor? Are we not threat actors? There you go, tornado. It's not official, but that's accurate. So why tornado? Obviously, it's a uniquely American kind of weather system. All right, good. So one of the things that is very interesting about Volt Typhoon is, like I said, their obsession with stealth. They are very, very concerned about remaining quiet and kind of living under the radar. And what's interesting is the point that I make here. One of the few threat actors that is known to actively avoid malware entirely in their operative phase of their attacks. So while they do use some malware in the staging part, in the operational part where we're actually looking at the environment and exfiltrating data, they use nothing that looks like malware. So it makes them very hard to detect, and we'll see why that's true as we go through this. So the first signs of Volt Typhoon, as I mentioned, came from very subtle indicators that were taking place against U.S. critical infrastructure on the island of Guam. So, as I mentioned, there was a telecom engineer from this company, NTT Docomo, that was operating out of Guam. So 3 a.m., he notices this kind of odd activity. Little did he know that he was the first eyes and ears to notice something wrong in one of the biggest breaches in recent memory. So, as you can imagine, his name is not being made public. So, I'm not sure that I would want my name being public in that kind of situation either. So he contacted Microsoft. We brought our threat analysts in and started looking around. And what we started to notice was that, is that me binging? Am I hitting something maybe? Okay. Okay, I thought I heard something clanging. It's just the things rattling in my head. So, where was I? So the Microsoft people came in, they started looking around, and they began to realize that, hey, we're seeing similar types of activity in other critical infrastructure components in the Asian Pacific region. So this looks like a bigger scale attack than just this one telco on the island of Guam. So by May 2023, Microsoft deemed that the campaign was serious enough that it had to go public. This was done in conjunction with the Five Eyes, so US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, is that the five? Yeah. And they went public with an advisory, and you can download that advisory, and it has all the TTPs and some of the IOCs that you can look at for identifying this threat actor. So this is one of the few times that Microsoft has actually gone public about an APT campaign in conjunction with government agencies. So it doesn't happen a lot, but this one was deemed to be significant enough that we did. So part of my role at Microsoft is I work with Microsoft partners. One of the partners that I work with is Lumen. Lumen has a threat intel group called Black Lotus Labs. And they do a great job of identifying botnets and threat actors, activities around the world. And they identified this one kind of interesting thing. They created a graphic for it. And this is how, in part, they were the threat actor that became Volt Typhoon was linked to China. So along the bottom, what you see is the hour from China Standard Time. So the attacks, as you can see, start, and what this is actually depicting is the activity on the botnets that Volt Typhoon was running. So like I said, they did have some malware that was running on some botnets that were composed of home routers. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But when those botnets were active, corresponded with 8 to 5 China Standard Time. And so that's kind of a pretty good indicator that that's where a lot of the stuff was coming from. Now, Volt Typhoon is basically the opposite of what you might consider a typical threat actor to be, or more specifically, the financially motivated threat actors, right? They didn't come in, they didn't smash and grab, they didn't try to knock down the doors and make sure that everybody knew we're here and we're going to ransomware your entire environment and you're going to pay for this. They are silent. They are a very, very long-term threat. In most cases, they were in the environments for about a year, in some cases as long as 5 years. They were in the environment and not detected till this one guy noticed something unusual. So they weren't looking to extort money. They weren't looking to deface any systems. They just wanted to exist in the environment and gather information. So if you think about that, it kind of leads you to the question, you know, what was their goal then? If they weren't in it for the money, if they weren't in it to destroy, what were they doing? And that's what the second bullet point is saying, that they were probably pre-positioning in the Asia-Pacific region in the event of a conflict. So if there ever were heightened tensions in the Pacific, which is about every other day now, they would be in a position to try to, for example, cut off communications to the U.S. So there are many articles that you can find that describe how China is pre-positioning themselves for this type of a conflict. And a lot of it has to do with destroying communications. So why Guam? Well, Guam might seem to be a relatively small island, but it plays a massive role in communications for the U.S. military as well as telecommunications in that entire region. So they're the thing in the circle, and those are telecom paths that you can see. They kind of just branch out from there. It's like a star that comes right out of Guam. What's interesting too, is if you see along just below the red line, you see some satellite orbits being depicted. And it wasn't just the telecom infrastructure, it was the satellite infrastructure that was also compromised. So they had access to both of these. Now again, I kind of named the deck or this presentation maybe incorrectly, because they weren't listening to telephone calls, right? So their goal was not necessarily to eavesdrop on what was going on. Their goal was to get ready to prevent that type of communication from happening in the event of a war. So that the disruption that they planned could create chaos in the U.S. military. There are a couple reasons why that's true. So Guam has some strategic military significance, right? So you've got Andersen Air Force Base that's located on Guam. You've got Naval Base Guam. So it's a big central location for the U.S. military to go out into the region, which might include Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, obviously, Australia, that whole area. And it would be central for any U.S. response to Chinese aggression against Taiwan, right? That's where a lot of the logistics and staging would take place if there was an attack against Taiwan. Guam also hosts a pretty significant amount of infrastructure that's leveraged by the U.S. military. So the Guam Power Authority supplies about 20% of the energy that the U.S. Navy needs in that region. So if they could cut off that energy supply, that would be a significant impact to the military's ability to operate in the region. As I mentioned, they're probably also, definitely also, pre-positioning for a conflict. So the pre-positioning allows them to be in a position where they can disable communications, disable power, cause difficulties for United States military in that region. It does also happen to be geographically located very close to many of the areas that China cares about and the conflicts that are taking place in the South China Sea. Even if they don't attack Taiwan, the South China Sea stuff that they're engaged in could also be impacted by the U.S. military presence on Guam. The last thing is that Guam is not a particularly strengthened island from a cyber perspective. So their infrastructure was relatively vulnerable, and so it was an easy target for the Chinese to get in, and now they have a kind of a foothold in this very large region that was strategic militarily for them. So how did they do it? This is Microsoft's depiction of the attack, how it took place. And I don't know about you, but when I look at this, I admire the simplicity of what they did. This was not complicated how they did it. Probably the most complicated part are the first two stages on the left-hand side of the slide, where they're developing their resources. They have to have a compromised home router network that they can operate through, and then they had to get in through a series of edge devices at the target networks, which might be something like a Fortinet FortiGate or VPN concentrator that they would use to get in. And then after that, it was kind of just living off the land. So we'll talk about each of those stages as we go through this, but a very elegant, very quiet operation, really, really good operators that were doing this. Good from the perspective of talent, not necessarily good from the perspective of good guys. So, as I mentioned, one of the things that they did was they compromised a large number of home routers. So your D-Links, your Netgears, your Asus, your Ciscos around the world, and that became their proxy network that they operated through. And the goal was to obfuscate where the traffic was coming from, right? They didn't want the traffic to be obviously coming from China, and so they compromised these home routers. This is the only stage where malware was used. So remember the picture I showed you of the Lumen Black Lotus Labs diagram? Those are indicative of the botnet that was part of, or that these routers were part of. And they did have malware on those routers. But after this, no more. Everything else after this was just living off the land. So once they had this area or botnet of these home routers that they could operate through, then they began to target the actual environment. And so they would start the attack by getting into a network device that was internet facing. In many cases, in this particular attack, it was a Fortinet FortiGate, either firewall or VPN that was used to gain entry. There was a known bug in the software that hadn't been patched. And so really what was elegant about this is that they didn't even have to kind of tip their hand by sending out phishing email, right? So a lot of times we see that as kind of the precursor for attackers, is they send phishing email to try to get into the network. These were just firewalls that were unpatched. They could just get in through that unpatched firewall, and they were able to take advantage of that access. Now, what made this twice as bad is that because the Fortinets were integrated with Active Directory, there was a stored admin credential on the Fortinets. So the attackers could get in, they could look at the device, extract a domain admin credential, and there they go. You know, they're off to the races. They have domain admin credentials immediately on the network, and they can kind of do whatever they need to do. So again, this is part of how they did this so stealthily. They were using legitimate usernames, legitimate passwords, and so unless you were paying really close attention to what was taking place, it would be hard to identify that this was malicious activity. It just looked like valid access, and so that's how they kind of made this progression to the inside of the network and were successful. I'm trying to think of what my next question will be for the other prizes. Hang on. Okay, before I go to the next slide, who can tell me what the utility is that you can use on a domain controller to back up your Active Directory database? What's that? What house? That's probably wrong. Bloodhound. You said Bloodhound. Oh, Bloodhound. No. NTDS util. Good. All right. So you get a USB router there. All right. So that's one of the things that was used here. So once they get into the network, they have one domain admin credential by extracting it from that Fortinet appliance. Now, the goal is, how many more credentials can I get? Just in case this one credential, the password rotates, or somebody identifies, that they're using this, I need as many credentials as possible. And so one of the things that they did was they would dump passwords from LSASS. LSASS is a process that runs on Windows machines where usernames and passwords are stored in temporary memory, and you can extract those from memory and use them. But the NTDS util is one of the ways that you can make a copy of your entire Active Directory database. And so they would run this NTDS util, which again is just a tool that's built into the operating system when you have domain controller. NTDS util is one of the tools that is just provided by Microsoft. So they weren't doing anything that was necessarily going to tip anybody off that there was something bad going on. They would make a copy of the entire Active Directory database. They would then move that copy of the database off-site, and then they could crack the passwords in that database. And then they have not just the keys to the kingdom from a domain admin perspective, but all the keys to the kingdom, including every single user in the environment if that's what they chose to use. So they extracted these from an offline backup. Now, as a pro tip, you should never see admins running NTDS util every 30 days. And that's what was happening, right? So this was happening in this environment every 30, 60, 90 days, whatever. It was some kind of a regularly scheduled thing that they were doing just so that they had the latest copies of the passwords and everything. That should not ever be happening, okay? So, you know, God forbid it's happening in your network, but if you see this happening in your network, you know, raise a flag, right? This is something that you shouldn't be seeing. So they've got all the passwords now, right? They've got all the passwords, and now what they want to do is figure out, okay, what's on this network? And the way that they did this, again, is using standard things that are built into Windows. So in many cases, they use things like remote desktop. They would use connection to SMB file shares. Whatever kind of tools that an admin on the network might be using, they would use the same tools. And they would do this in a way that would blend in with your typical IT activity. So they would use PowerShell. They would use Windows Management Instrumentation. They'd use command lines. They'd use things like ipconfig. They'd use ping. They'd use whoami, PowerShell scripts. The same things that you and I would use on a daily basis to do good things on the network, they would use those things in a way to identify what else is out there, what's interesting, what machines have databases that I care about, what file servers have copies of the network that I care about. So these are all some of the activities that they engaged in. And again, simply because they were using tools that we use on a daily basis, it was very, very hard to identify the maliciousness of the activity. So they're kind of roaming the network, looking at everything that's going on, and now they have to figure out, okay, how do I get this information out? And again, they didn't do anything terribly unique, anything terribly scary. Their goal was to collect documents, configuration files, email, whatever it might be, and then just zip it up, maybe password protect the zip file, and slowly start moving it out of the network so that it didn't raise any red flags. Now, what's interesting, if you think about this, is for the time period that they were operating in the Pacific region, which, like I said, was 2021 to 2023-ish, AI was not widely being used, right? So when they got a lot of this configuration information, these network maps and things like that, they had to have somebody sit down and look at it and say, okay, here's what this looks like. Here's some machines over here that we care about. Let's find out if they have these vulnerabilities and whatever. Now, they can just feed that into an LLM and get the answers back within minutes, right? So the time frame that we have to protect our networks has shrunk dramatically because they're going to use LLMs to find those vulnerabilities, get recommendations on how to compromise those vulnerabilities, and that puts us in a little bit of a hole. So finally, they would exfiltrate the data, and they would do this in very small chunks, right? They'd use covert channels, go through those router proxies that we talked about, just to avoid setting off any alarms. So it's possible that some of the data didn't leave for months, even years after they got their initial access, because again, their goal was not necessarily to steal data. their goal was to implant themselves and be ready when the time came, right? The stealing the data was secondary, maybe. Their first objective was be ready for a war. So how did they maintain their persistence? So if you're familiar with something like Meterpreter, a reverse proxy is a fairly common way that attackers will use to compromise an environment and maintain their persistence in that environment. So one of the tools that they used was fast reverse proxy. They also use something called Impacket for network operations. And the basic idea here, I'm going to kind of walk you through how this actually works, is if you're an attacker and you want to RDP to the machine on the right-hand side, which is a client machine, chances are you're not going to be able to just RDP directly through from your location in China all the way to the internal network, right? You're going to have to figure out some other way to do that. And so what they'll do, once they've already compromised the environment, they want to be able to make sure, okay, I need to be able to make sure I can get back into this environment at a later point, right? So what they'll do is they'll use this fast reverse proxy. There's an INI file that you can configure, and you'll have a fast reverse proxy server, which is the machine in the middle there. It's going to be running frps.exe, that's frp server.exe, and then you've got frpc.exe, which is your client piece running on the machine that you want to RDP into. So the way it works is this. You configure the server to listen on ports, let's say 7,000 and 3389, okay? That's, you configure that in the INI file. Now that server is listening on those ports. The next thing you do is, what that enables is the client to establish a connection with the server. So after the connection has been established, then it runs frpc.exe that's installed on the target PC and tries to establish a connection back to the server, which is our relay device. When the relay and the target PCs are connected, then the attacker on the left-hand side is going to try to connect to the target PC. So he says, okay, I want to connect first to server Y over port 23389. So he makes that connection to the server. The server, because it's able to proxy that connection, filters it down and makes the connection over port 7000 to the client machine. The client machine is then, or the server rather, is able to connect to the client machine, and then once they're on the client machine, then the client machine can forward to port 3389, which is RDP, and they can RDP on that machine. Now, the advantage of it, I mean, it seems like a very complicated way to do things, but the advantage here is that this method of establishing persistence allows them to keep that persistent presence even through reboots. So if the machines are rebooted, then the client and the server come back up, they establish that connection, you make the connection again to the reverse proxy server, and you can get back in even if the end users reboot the machines. So it's an elegant way to maintain persistence on the environment. And like I said, this is not uncommon. It's what's used with Meterpreter and other tools. So how did they cover their tracks? One thing, as I mentioned, was simply living off the land. So they used tools, they used processes that are very commonly used in typical Windows administration processes. And so your antivirus, your EDR, there was nothing to detect that was out of the ordinary, right? You're running PowerShell, you're running Windows WMI, you're running a command line. There's nothing wrong innately with those things. Their goal with running them was improper, but the EDRs wouldn't necessarily pick up anything wrong on that. They would also clear their logs or disable certain logging in order to wipe evidence. So they were very careful not to set off any security alerts, for example, by simply deleting all the event logs or using tools that don't leave obvious footprints. So, what have we learned from this? First one is keep your house in order. So CISA issued this advisory that said that threat actors are compromising small office, home office routers by exploiting software defects. And so yeah, there's an obligation by the vendors who make these products to take care of patching them and so on, but there's an obligation on each of us to make sure that our infrastructure at home is well taken care of, because that's what they're leveraging. They're counting on home users not being savvy enough to know, I need to patch this stuff, I need to upgrade these things. Sherrod DeGrippo, who is the Director of Threat Intelligence Strategy at Microsoft, said, please go home and patch your routers, and then on your next day off, go patch your parents' routers. I think that's a brilliant statement, right? So what are the chances that your parents are going to update their routers? Anybody? No? My dad, just yesterday, while I was driving here, he called me and said, I was just listening on the radio, and they said not to upgrade from Windows 10 to Windows 11 because Windows 11 deletes all your data. Is that true? I said, Dad, you've been on Windows 11 for 5 years. What are you asking me for? Oh, okay, yeah, you're right. So what are some things that we can look for? Let's take a look at some of the things that we can be observant in our own network and figure out if something like this is happening. And this applies whether or not the biggest threat on our radar is the Chinese government or somebody else. These are good practices regardless of what our biggest threat is. So one of the first ones is look for strange admin locations. So if you see an admin account or any account that's logging in from an IP address that doesn't fit, that should be a red flag, right? Make sure that you're paying attention to those things, and UEBA, User Entity Behavior Analytics, is a big help in identifying that sort of thing. I'm not going to be the Microsoft shill and say, you have to go buy Defender Plan 2 and blah, 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 blah. But there are tools that are built into Entra and that are built into, for example, Sentinel, that track user and entity behavior and can alert on things that are unusual, right? So in Volt Typhoon's case, they piggybacked on those hacked home and office routers, and so it made it look like their access was coming from some random Comcast or China Telecom IP that your admins typically wouldn't be using. The second one is credential dumping activity. So any sign that LSAS memory is being dumped is bad news. In your Windows logs, this might show up as some certain suspicious event IDs. If you look at the top hardened credential stores, there's some guidance there for how to use Credential Guard. We also have Remote Credential Guard for remote desktop sessions that you can use as well, and can allow you to protect your LSAS stored memory. Also, as I mentioned, using NTDS util should immediately raise a flag, right? There's a limited number of reasons why you should be running NTDS util, and generally the admins on the network should be aware that this is what's happening, right? If it's happening without their awareness, there's generally a problem. And then look for suspicious archive or file creation types of activities. So an unusual number of password-protected zip or RAR files in temporary directories, in user home directories. Those might be an indicator of an attacker staging data to exfiltrate at a later time. What else can we look for? So the port proxying, the forwarding that we talked about, the fast reverse proxy, how do I identify that sort of thing? So we want to be able to identify what ports are our machines listening on, and how can we identify whether this is bad activity. So Sandia Labs has guidance on detecting use of proxies. That's up at the top of the right-hand side. So that's a good resource to use for identifying machines that are possibly being used to proxy data. And then look for things like log clearing. Like I said, in the case of Volt Typhoon, they didn't do a lot of log clearing, but they did do some. And so when that happens, that should maybe be something that you take a look at. So if they're using WVT util, that might be one of the things that you look at. I did, on the bottom right, provide a link to Black Lotus Labs, their list of IOCs for Volt Typhoon. It is very interesting to look at and find the IP addresses and file hashes and whatever that they were able to identify as being associated with Volt Typhoon. And if you don't already have those ingested or listed on your SIM, it'd be a good idea to do that. So what did CISA recommend in terms of priority actions for organizations? It's all stuff that we've all heard over and over and over again, right? Apply patches to your internet-facing systems. Prioritize patching your critical vulnerabilities. Implement phishing-resistant MFA. Anybody want to tell me what phishing-resistant MFA is for a book?
Not SMS.
Huh?
Not SMS.
What's that? I didn't know who answered.
Said not SMS.
Not as much?
Not text.
Oh, not SMS. Okay, yeah. Go ahead. Okay, that's an example, but what is the idea behind phishing-resistant MFA? What's the goal? I saw your hand up.
To make it so that you have to do something at the machine where you're logging in, not just say yes to make your phone shut up.
Yep, good.
So maybe that's type in a number or something.
All right, good. So YubiKey is one of the examples. Not SMS is one of the examples. Maybe not the exact thing I was looking for, but yeah. So it's no longer the case where we can simply say just use MFA because SMS is an MFA, right? So it's not the one that we want to be using. The third one, ensure logging is turned on for application access and security logs, and store those logs in a central system. Everybody using some sort of SIM or log aggregation location of some sort? Oh, goodness. Okay. All right. And then lastly, plan end of life for technology beyond the manufacturer-supported life cycle. So a lot of those small office, home office routers were out of date. They were no longer being supported by the vendor, but they're still out there, and new vulnerabilities are being identified on a regular basis. So it became pretty easy for the attackers to take advantage of them. Now, the one thing that I think is just really, really interesting about this, right? Microsoft is bad about this. You know, we talk about how AI and Copilot and this and that, and all this is going to make your SOC run on AI and blah, 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 right? Everybody's heard that from your Microsoft people, right? You want to use AI agents, and you want to use this, that, and the other thing. What was it that solved the problem here? It was one person paying attention to their environment. That's what caught it. It wasn't Copilot. It wasn't some mysterious AI tool. One guy found what was going on, and he raised a flag. So AI is great for some things, but there's nothing that can replace, right now, the ability of a human to reason on something and make a decision about whether it's good or bad, right? So never forget that you have the ability to impact the security of your environment just by paying attention. And that's it. Any questions? Sir.
So in the graphic that you had that showed the botnet activity,
Yeah.
There was an outlier, right? Friday night at 10 o'clock. Can you tell us what that was?
I don't know. I could talk to Lumen and see if they have any ideas about why that was true. maybe some guy didn't have much of a life, and so he was working on Friday nights. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what it was. But it's, I mean, it's a good question. I wondered the same thing, like why this one little section? But if anybody has any ideas, I'm happy to hear them.
So one of the tactics you had on your tactics slide was the creation of Active Directory reinstallation media.
Yeah.
I wondered if you could expound upon that. Like, were they tricking the admins into building their domain controller or something?
No, no, no. So that's what they were backing up. So the NTDS util can be used to create a backup of your directory so that you create another domain controller very easily with that backup. So that's what that was.
So one other question. Is it really necessary for the FortiGate to have domain admin credentials in order to authenticate users against the LDAP, or is there some other way to architect that?
Theoretically, no, right? I mean, all you have to do is bind against LDAP and read. So, yeah.
So it shouldn't need domain admin.
I mean,
I just looked up the documentation and it says to use an admin credential.
yeah, I don't know what the reason would be why they did that, but I don't work for Fortinet. I don't know.
Thank you.
Sir. I'm sorry, I missed the first part of your question.
The thing that strikes me about that kill chain is it's about 5 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, every single piece of that is instrumented in every single SIM, EDR, UA, whatever black box magic solution you had, including the Microsoft suite of stuff. So when I look at that, I say, well, either they weren't looking or they weren't instrumenting. This was not a sophisticated attack. This is an attack using old techniques that were either not caught, not instrumented, or ignored.
Well,
There's nothing new on that slide that I haven't seen for 5 years.
that's true. And that's because what they were using is things that you use every day, right? That's what was the key, is that they didn't.
They're not. This is what I'm one of the people that get a lot of, talking about it, the jaded admin determined to make a difference. I've been doing this 25 years.
Yeah.
We continue to fight the same battle with the same tools and lose, and this is why. There is nothing on that slide that everybody uses every day. I have a whole team of domain admins, yet I still alert every time someone touches FTDS util.
You have a whole lot of people that can elevate their privileges to domain admins, right?
What?
You have a whole bunch of people that can elevate their privileges to domain admins, right?
The job role, not system.
Got it. Okay.
But I mean, yes, there are elevated and special credentials and all that, all those controls in place. What I'm saying, every time someone uses that command, we know about it. Every time someone does any of those things, we know about it. And we have for 5 years.
And that's fantastic, but not everybody's doing that kind of granular alerting. That's fantastic. I mean, what you're doing is what we expect everybody to be doing, right?
Right, and I would expect NTT Docomo to be at least that sophisticated, so I think there's more to this story. Or
Maybe.
maybe my expectations are too high for NTT.
Well, just everybody's got levels. Yes, sir.
I had just a question on their evolving tactics. Have you seen them pivoting? You mentioned the importance of logging. There's some places that you can't put EDR. Have you seen this threat actor making use of difficult places to monitor, like embedded infrastructure, appliances, things where you can only
Yeah. So for sure, one of the things that they did, so it wasn't simply that they would get into the Windows network, right? Typically, the Windows network is the bridge into the OT network, right? And so that's really where their goal is to get to the stuff that runs the power grid, the stuff that runs, the telecom and stuff like that. That's all OT stuff. So they were definitely making movements into that. I was primarily talking about the Windows part of the environment. So yes, 100% they're doing that.
How did they get the FRPC or FRPS on the endpoints?
So they have to have already made, they have to have already landed inside the network and been able to install on that machine. What you're trying to do is establish persistence so that even if you get booted out, you have a way back in. So The INI file that you configure, that's what kind of gives you that doorway back into the network if something, kicks you out. That's not how they got in.
That's not a living off the land tool. That's an open source client.
So that's true. So that is not necessarily living off land, but they could also do NetSH port proxy, right? And that would do the same thing.
So the FRPS was just an example. They could also use raw sockets or whatever else.
Yeah. So in that case, it was not living off the land, but they still got away with it. Yeah.
So I guess one thing I didn't hear you touch on that I think I remember is it wasn't one of the things that made this so prolific was that they used some Cisco vulnerabilities and they had infiltrated essentially every telecom, U.S. telecom Cisco.
So I think you're thinking of Salt Typhoon.
Oh, okay.
So Salt Typhoon, probably the same guys, or at least a subset of that group that knows the telecom infrastructure and knows kind of what to look for. They're the ones that infiltrated Verizon, AT&T, all that stuff. That was a little bit later. That was like last year, I think. I can't remember exactly when it took place. Might have been. I can't remember when the Salt Typhoon thing happened. I think that was last year. But the Volt Typhoon was a year before. Yes, sir.
Do you know how the researchers trace it back to the home routers as being the original source?
You mean the researchers at Lumen? Or
Whoever's doing the research, how they determined that the home routers?
well, I mean, one of the ways you'd be able to see from the logging on like the Fortinets, you'd be able to see what IP address was connecting to it. That'd be one way.
So you saw a bunch of home, residential endpoints connected to this Fortinet.
Right. Oh, sorry.
Do we know how long the forward reverse proxy chains ended up being? Like, how do you get from one router all the way of military versus that?
Do we know how long
The reverse proxy chains.
how long it was? You mean how long they had persistence?
Yes.
Oh, years. In some cases, as much as 5 years. Maybe even still. Who knows? I wouldn't be surprised if some of them do. Well, what was the idea behind your question? Huh?
I think it's how many hops in the path.
Oh, you're asking about how many hops?
Yes.
Oh, that I don't know. I don't know if there was anything defined about that. What you can do is look at that CISA advisory. They go into a lot of detail about how exactly that was performed and exactly what tactics were used. So they might mention that. All right. Well, thank you everybody for your attention. Appreciate it.